The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the Arizona territory as Sophia Hart collapsed onto the dusty trail, her parched lips cracked from days without proper water. The year was 1883, and the unforgiving desert had claimed many lives before hers, but fate had other plans on this particular evening. Sophia had been traveling for nearly a week since fleeing the remains of her family's homestead. The Banning gang had left nothing behind but smoldering ruins and fresh graves. At 22, she found herself completely alone in the world, stumbling westward with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket around her neck. The distant sound of hoofbeats barely registered in her fading consciousness. Her once vibrant blue dress was now torn and caked with the rust-colored dirt of the territory. Sophia's golden hair, usually neatly pinned, hung in tangled strands around her face as she pressed her cheek against the cool earth. Death, she thought, wasn't so frightening after all. Perhaps it would be a release from the nightmare her life had become. The hoofbeats grew louder, and dust swirled around her prone form. A magnificent black stallion came to a halt nearby, and a tall figure dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Miss, can you hear me?" The voice was deep, concerned, with a slight drawl that marked him as a man of the frontier. When Sophia didn't respond, strong arms gently turned her over. Through half-lidded eyes, she glimpsed a weathered face framed by dark hair, concerned eyes studying her with genuine worry. "You're alive, thank God," the stranger murmured. He reached for his canteen, carefully lifting her head to help her drink. The water was cool and sweet, the most precious thing she'd tasted in days. "Easy now," he cautioned when she tried to gulp it down. "Too much too fast will make you sick." After a few more sips, the man assessed her condition with a practiced eye. With gentle movements, he gathered her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. Sophia felt herself being lifted as if she weighed nothing at all. "I've got you," he said softly, his breath warm against her forehead. His lips pressed against her brow in a gesture that wasn't presumptuous but rather comforting, a promise. "You're safe now. I give you my word." The sincerity in his voice penetrated the fog of her exhaustion. As he placed her carefully on his horse before mounting behind her, Sophia allowed herself to lean back against the stranger's solid chest. For the first time in days, she felt something other than terror and despair. She felt hope. "Name's Mason Thornton," he said as they rode toward the setting sun. "And I promise you, miss, no more harm will come to you while I'm around." Sophia didn't have the strength to respond, but as consciousness slipped away, she felt oddly certain that this man, this cowboy who'd appeared like an answer to prayers she hadn't even voiced, would keep his word. Mason's homestead came into view as twilight deepened into night. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, a main cabin with a covered porch, a barn, and corrals for horses and cattle. A dog barked a welcome as they approached, and a lantern glowed warmly in the window. "This is Ranger," Mason introduced as the border collie circled the horse excitedly. "He's friendly, just noisy." Sophia managed a weak nod, still dazed from her ordeal. Mason dismounted and carefully lifted her down, carrying her toward the cabin with steady steps. Inside, the home was simple but clean, a far cry from the elegant Virginia home she'd grown up in, but welcoming nonetheless. He laid her gently on a bed in a small room off the main living area. "This was my sister's room," he explained. "She's married and living in Santa Fe now. It's yours for as long as you need it." Mason built up the fire in the main room and heated water for a bath. When it was ready, he discreetly left her alone with a clean shirt of his to wear afterward, respecting her privacy and dignity even in her weakened state. The bath revived Sophia enough that she could finally speak. When Mason returned after her soft call, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt hanging nearly to her knees, her damp hair combed back. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice hoarse but clear. "I'm Sophia Hart. I don't know how to repay your kindness." "Mason, please," he corrected with a gentle smile. "And there's nothing to repay." Anyone would have done the same, but they both knew that wasn't true. The frontier was as cruel as it was beautiful, and many would have ridden past, or worse, taken advantage of a vulnerable woman. "Are you hungry?" he asked, changing the subject. "I've got stew warming." Over a simple meal of venison stew and cornbread, Sophia gradually told Mason her story how the Banning gang had raided her family's new homestead, how she'd hidden in the root cellar while they murdered her father and older brother, how she'd buried them herself before fleeing eastward. Mason listened without interruption, his jaw tightening at the mention of the notorious gang. "They've been terrorizing settlements across 3 territories," he said when she finished. "The law's been after them for years." "I should have fought," Sophia whispered, tears threatening. "I should have done something." Mason reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "You survived," he said firmly. "That's what you should have done, and that's what you did. Your pa and brother would want that." That night, Sophia slept in a real bed for the first time in days, the sounds of the wilderness kept at bay by solid walls and the knowledge that Mason Thornton was keeping watch. She should have felt strange, being alone with a man she'd just met, but instead, she felt only gratitude and an inexplicable sense of trust. Morning brought clarity and the full realization of her situation. Sophia had no home, no family, and no prospects. The nearest town, Mason told her, was Silver Creek, about 15 miles west. She could find work there perhaps, or passage on a stage to California. "But there's no rush," Mason assured her as he served a breakfast of eggs and bacon. "You're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered and have made proper plans." Sophia studied her rescuer in the clear light of day. Mason Thornton was around 30, she guessed, with the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. His face was tanned from years under the sun, with smile lines around his eyes suggesting he laughed often, though his expression had been mostly serious since finding her. "Why are you alone out here?" she asked suddenly. "A man like you should have a family." A shadow crossed his face. "Had one, once," he said quietly. "My wife Elizabeth died in childbirth 3 years ago. Lost the baby too." "I'm so sorry," Sophia said, wishing she hadn't asked. Mason shook his head. "It's all right. Life out here teaches you to keep moving forward. I've got my ranch, my horses, old Ranger there. It's enough." But Sophia could see in his eyes that it wasn't. This man, who had shown such kindness to a stranger, carried a profound loneliness he tried to hide behind work and duty. As days passed, Sophia regained her strength. She insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and mending Mason's clothes. He protested at first, but she was stubborn. "I won't be a burden," she declared firmly. "You're not," he assured her. "But if it makes you feel better, I won't argue with having decent meals again. I'm a terrible cook." They fell into an easy rhythm. Mason would work from dawn until dusk, tending his cattle, mending fences, and breaking horses, his specialty and main source of income. Sophia kept the cabin, learning to manage a frontier household that was far different from her privileged upbringing in Virginia. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset, sometimes talking, sometimes enjoying comfortable silence. Mason taught her to shoot a rifle, just in case, he said, and showed her the signs of the land, which plants were edible, how to find water, how to read the weather from the clouds. 2 weeks after her arrival, Mason needed to go to Silver Creek for supplies. Sophia insisted on accompanying him, feeling both curious about the town and aware that she needed to start thinking about her future. "Are you sure you're up for the ride?" Mason asked, concern evident in his voice. "I am," Sophia said with more confidence than she felt. "Besides, I need to at least look for work. I can't impose on your hospitality forever." Something flickered across Mason's face, disappointment, perhaps, but he nodded. "We'll leave at dawn, then." Silver Creek was a typical frontier town. One main street lined with a general store, saloon, small hotel, sheriff's office, and assorted businesses. Nothing like the cities Sophia had known, but bustling in its own way with cowboys, miners, and settlers going about their business. Mason was greeted warmly by most they passed, tipping his hat to ladies and exchanging nods with men. Sophia noticed the curious glances directed their way. A single man with an unknown young woman was bound to start tongues wagging. "Mason Thornton." "About time you showed your face in town," called a tall man with a sheriff's badge as they tied their horses outside the general store. "Sheriff Michaels." Mason greeted him with a handshake. "Been busy with the spring calves and breaking that new stock." The sheriff's eyes moved to Sophia with undisguised curiosity. Mason quickly made introductions, explaining briefly how he'd found her. Miss Hart is looking for work in town, Mason added, though Sophia noticed a certain reluctance in his voice. That's so. Sheriff Michaels rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Well, Mrs. Parker at the hotel mentioned needing help, and I believe the widow Jenkins was looking for someone to help with her children since her husband passed last winter. Sophia thanked him for the information, aware of Mason's tension beside her. As they continued their errands, she became increasingly conscious of the looks they were receiving, some merely curious, others disapproving, and a few from rough-looking men that made her instinctively move closer to Mason. In the general store, the proprietor's wife was less than subtle. Mason, you've been keeping secrets, she said with a meaningful look between him and Sophia. Mrs. Barlow, Miss Hart is a guest at my ranch while she recovers from an ordeal, Mason said firmly. Nothing more. The woman looked skeptical but handed over their supplies without further comment. As they left the store, a group of cowboys lounged outside the saloon across the street. One broke away from the others and approached them, his gait unsteady from drink despite the early hour. Well now, Mason Thornton finally found himself a woman. The man slurred, looking Sophia up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. Mason stepped slightly in front of her. You're drunk, Pete. Go sleep it off. Ain't too drunk to see you've been hiding a beauty out at your place, Pete persisted. Mighty selfish of you. Maybe the lady would prefer some younger company. The lady isn't interested, Sophia said firmly, finding her voice. Pete's expression darkened. Didn't ask you, did I? Back off, Pete, Mason warned, his voice dangerously quiet. Now. Something in Mason's tone made the drunk cowboy hesitate. He spat in the dirt near their feet, but retreated to his friends, muttering obscenities. I'm sorry about that, Mason said as they mounted their horses to leave town. Their business concluded faster than planned. Pete Collins is harmless when sober, but mean when drinking. It's not your fault, Sophia assured him. But I see why you prefer your ranch to town. The ride back was quieter than their journey in. Sophia was troubled by the encounters in Silver Creek, but for reasons that surprised her. She'd intended to find work and establish herself independently, yet the prospect of leaving Mason's ranch filled her with unexpected sadness. Did you want to speak with Mrs. Parker about the hotel position? Mason asked suddenly, breaking the silence. We could have stayed longer. Sophia hesitated. Perhaps next time, she said. I think I need more time to recover fully. Relief crossed Mason's features before he could hide it. Of course, there's no rush. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Sophia found herself studying Mason's profile. In the few weeks she'd known him, she'd discovered a man of quiet strength, unfailing kindness, and hidden depths. A man nothing like the privileged suitors her father had once encouraged back east. What will you do? Mason asked softly, still looking at the stars. When you're fully recovered, I mean. Sophia considered the question carefully. I don't know, she admitted. Before all this, I had a path laid out: marriage to someone suitable, a house in town, children. Now, she trailed off, uncertain. Now you're free to choose, Mason finished for her. Terrible way to gain freedom, but it's yours nonetheless. Yes, she agreed. Though I'm not sure what choices are available to a woman alone in the territories. Mason turned to look at her then, his expression serious. You could stay, he said simply. Not as a guest or helper, but, well, this land gets into your blood. It's hard, but there's something about waking up to these mountains, watching the seasons change across the valley. Are you asking me to stay? Sophia asked carefully, her heart beating faster. Mason looked away, suddenly self-conscious. Just saying you have options, is all. But Sophia had seen something in his eyes, a longing that matched the one growing in her own heart. The next morning, everything changed. Mason returned from checking his fence line with news that chilled Sophia's blood. Riders coming, he said grimly, grabbing his rifle from above the door. 6 of them, and they don't look like they're making a social call. Sophia went pale. The Banning gang? Can't be sure, but they match the description, Mason said, checking his ammunition. Take my revolver and hide in the root cellar behind the house. There's a false wall at the back. Use it if you have to. I won't leave you to face them alone, Sophia protested. Mason gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. Sophia, these men won't hesitate to kill us both. I can handle myself, but I need to know you're safe. Please. The urgency in his voice convinced her. Taking the revolver, Sophia hurried to the root cellar, her heart pounding with fear not for herself, but for Mason. From her hiding place, she could hear the riders approach. Voices called out, followed by Mason's steady replies. The conversation grew heated. Then came the sound she dreaded most: gunshots. The ensuing firefight seemed to last forever, though it was probably only minutes. When silence finally fell, Sophia remained frozen, unsure whether to emerge. Had Mason prevailed, or were the gang members now searching for her? The root cellar door creaked open. "Sophia?" Mason's voice was strained but alive. "It's over." She rushed up the stairs to find him leaning heavily against the doorframe, blood staining his left side. "You're hurt," she gasped, helping him to a chair. "Just grazed," he grimaced. "But I got 2 of them." The others fled when the sheriff and his deputies showed up. They must have heard the shots from town. Sheriff Michaels and 2 deputies were indeed in the yard, examining the bodies of 2 rough-looking men. Sophia recognized one as the notorious Banning himself from wanted posters she'd seen. "They won't be bothering anyone else," the sheriff said when he came inside. "But the other 4 got away. They might come back for revenge." "Let them try," Mason said grimly, wincing as Sophia cleaned his wound. After the sheriff left, promising to send men to remove the bodies, Sophia helped Mason to his bed. The wound wasn't serious, a deep graze that had bled freely but wouldn't be fatal with proper care. As she tended him, her hands gentle but sure, Mason caught her wrist. "I'm sorry I brought this danger to your door," she whispered. "No," Mason said firmly. "They would have come eventually. Banning's been hitting every ranch in the territory. Finding you was just an excuse." Sophia finished bandaging his side and sat beside him on the bed. "I thought I might lose you," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Mason's hand found hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I made you a promise, remember? That you'd be safe with me." "And I believe you," Sophia said. "But who keeps you safe, Mason Thornton?" A small smile touched his lips. "Been taking care of myself a long time." "Perhaps you shouldn't have to," she suggested softly. Their eyes met, and the connection between them built over weeks of shared meals, conversations, and understanding seemed to crystallize into something neither could deny any longer. Mason reached up to touch her cheek. "Sophia, I've been alone since Elizabeth died. Told myself it was better that way. But then I found you and—" He hesitated. "I'm not a man of fancy words, but I think I'm falling in love with you." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Sophia felt tears well in her eyes as the realization of her own feelings became clear as mountain water. "I never expected to find anything good after losing my family," she whispered. "But then there you were, offering safety when I had nothing. And now?" Mason prompted gently. "Now I don't want to leave," Sophia confessed. "Not to work in town, not to go to California. I want to stay here, with you." Mason's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He drew her down to him carefully, mindful of his injury, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home after a long journey. In the days that followed, Mason recovered quickly under Sophia's attentive care. The threat of the remaining Banning gang members lingered, but they strengthened the ranch's defenses and refused to live in fear. Word spread through the territory that Mason Thornton had killed Banning himself, and riders occasionally stopped by to congratulate him and to satisfy their curiosity about the woman now openly living at his ranch. "They're going to talk," Mason warned her one evening as they watched another visitor ride away. "A proper woman would insist on marriage before staying with a man." Sophia smiled mischievously. "Are you saying I'm not proper, Mr. Thornton?" "I'm saying," he replied carefully, "that I want to protect your reputation." "Is that the only reason you'd marry me?" she teased. Mason turned to her, suddenly serious. "You know it's not. But I won't rush you, Sophia. You've had enough choices taken from you already." Sophia considered his words, appreciating his consideration but finding it unnecessary. In the few months since he'd found her half dead on the trail, she'd discovered a strength in herself she hadn't known existed and the courage to reach for happiness when it presented itself. "I don't need more time," she said decisively. "Unless you do?" Mason's answer was to pull her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words couldn't express. They were married 2 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church. The ceremony was simple, attended by a few of Mason's friends and neighbors. Sophia wore a blue dress they'd ordered from Denver, and Mason looked uncommonly handsome in a new shirt and his least-worn pair of denims. Sheriff Michaels stood as Mason's best man, and the widow Jenkins, who had become a friend to Sophia, stood with her. The town had initially buzzed with gossip about their hasty marriage, but the genuine affection between them was obvious to anyone who saw them together. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sheriff Michaels commented at the small reception afterward. Mason Thornton settling down again. "You must be something special, Mrs. Thornton." The new name sent a thrill through Sophia. "He's the special one," she replied, watching as her husband, accepted congratulations from well-wishers. Their first night as husband and wife was both awkward and wonderful. Mason was gentle and patient, guiding Sophia through the unfamiliar territory of physical love with tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked anxiously when he saw her tears. "Yes," she assured him, touching his face lovingly. "I'm just happy. I never thought I would be again." "I aim to keep you that way," Mason promised, kissing her with renewed passion. Life settled into a new rhythm after their marriage. They worked side by side, building a partnership that strengthened with each passing day. Mason taught Sophia to ride properly, not side saddle as she'd learned back east, but astride like a true frontier woman. She proved a quick study, soon able to help with the cattle and even assist when Mason broke new horses. In turn, Sophia brought refinement to their home, creating beauty in small ways: wildflowers in mason jars, curtains sewn from fabric ordered from the mercantile, a vegetable garden that flourished under her care. She taught Mason to read better, sharing her favorite books during the long winter evenings. Their happiness was disrupted only once, 6 months after their wedding, when the remaining members of the Banning gang made good on their threat of revenge. They came at dawn, firing into the cabin while Mason and Sophia were still abed. Mason reacted instantly, pushing Sophia to the floor and grabbing his rifle. "Stay down," he ordered, returning fire through the window. But Sophia was no longer the frightened girl who had hidden in the root cellar. While Mason engaged the attackers from the front, she took his revolver and crept to the back window. One of the gang members was attempting to circle around to the rear of the cabin. Taking careful aim as Mason had taught her, Sophia fired. The man went down with a shout of pain, clutching his shoulder. The firefight continued for several minutes before the attackers retreated, carrying their wounded companion. This time, Sheriff Michaels and a posse of townsmen arrived in time to give chase, eventually capturing the remaining members of the infamous gang. When the dust settled, Mason found Sophia calmly reloading the revolver, her nightgown smudged with gunpowder. "You saved my life," he said with a mixture of pride and concern. "We saved each other," she corrected him. "That's what partners do." Mason gathered her into his arms, his heart overflowing with love and admiration for the woman who had transformed from a half-dead stranger to the strongest person he knew. With the Banning threat finally eliminated, the Thornton ranch prospered. Mason's reputation as a horse breaker grew, bringing buyers from as far as California. Sophia began breeding chickens and selling eggs in town, developing a side business that soon rivaled many of Mason's smaller contracts. A year after their wedding, Sophia discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought both joy and anxiety for Mason, given his past loss, but Sophia's unwavering confidence gradually eased his fears. "This baby will be fine," she assured him whenever she caught him watching her with worried eyes. "We both will." Their daughter, Margaret Elizabeth Thornton, was born on a crisp autumn morning with the assistance of the doctor from Silver Creek and the widow Jenkins. When Mason first held his daughter, with her tuft of dark hair and her mother's blue eyes, the last shadows of his past grief finally lifted completely. "She's perfect," he whispered, placing the baby in Sophia's arms before kissing her forehead just as he had that first day on the trail. "Thank you." Sophia smiled tiredly. "For what?" "For surviving," Mason said simply. "For being strong enough to build this life with me." As Margaret grew from infant to toddler, the Thornton ranch expanded. Mason hired 2 hands to help with the increasing livestock, and they added rooms to the cabin to accommodate their growing family and occasional visitors. Sophia's father's sister, who had believed her niece dead, discovered her whereabouts through a series of fortunate coincidences and made the journey from Virginia to meet her grandniece. Initially shocked by Sophia's frontier life, Aunt Harriet gradually came to understand the deep happiness her niece had found. "Your father would be scandalized," she commented as they watched Mason teaching 3-year-old Margaret to ride a gentle pony. "But I think your mother would understand. She always said you had adventure in your soul." "Are you disappointed in me, Aunt Harriet?" Sophia asked, giving up society for this. The older woman considered the question seriously. "How could I be?" she finally replied. "You've built something real here. Something that would have taken courage even without the tragedies you've faced." 2 years later, Sophia gave birth to twins Samuel and Michael, completing their family and filling the ranch with the joyful chaos of children's laughter. Mason proved an attentive father, teaching their children the ways of the land while ensuring they received proper schooling as well. Silver Creek grew from a frontier outpost to a proper town, with a school, several churches, and even a small library that Sophia helped establish. The Thorntons became respected fixtures in the community, with Mason serving on the town council and Sophia organizing aid for new settlers. 10 years after Mason had found Sophia dying in the dust, they stood together on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Margaret, now 9, was showing her 6-year-old brothers how to lasso a fence post, her dark hair flying in the breeze. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sophia asked, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "That day when you found me on the trail?" Mason's arm tightened around her waist. "I hoped you'd live," he said honestly. "Prayed for it. But this..." He gestured to their thriving ranch, their beautiful children, the life they'd built together. "This was beyond hoping. Not beyond deserving, though," Sophia said, turning in his arms to face him. Despite the years of sun and wind, despite the silver now threading through his dark hair, Mason Thornton remained the most handsome man she'd ever seen because she saw not just his face, but his heart. "I love you, Mason Thornton," she said, the words as true now as the first time she'd spoken them. "Thank you for keeping your promise." Mason's brow furrowed slightly. "Which promise was that?" "Safety," Sophia reminded him. "You promised me safety that first day." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, that promise." His voice softened as he brushed a strand of golden hair from her face hair that remained as bright as the day they'd met. "I think we've gone far beyond mere safety, Mrs. Thornton." "We have indeed," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Their children's groans of mock disgust made them break apart, laughing. Margaret stood with her hands on her hips, looking remarkably like her mother despite her father's coloring. "Are you two being romantic again?" she demanded with the outrage only a 9-year-old could muster. "Guilty as charged," Mason admitted, scooping her up despite her protests that she was too big for such treatment. The twins, not wanting to be left out, clamored for their mother's attention. Sophia gathered them close, her heart so full it seemed impossible it had once been empty of everything but grief. That night, with the children asleep and the ranch quiet under a canopy of stars, Mason and Sophia walked hand in hand to the ridge overlooking their property. It had become something of a tradition on the anniversary of their meeting, a private pilgrimage to remember and give thanks. "I still have nightmares sometimes," Sophia admitted as they settled on a fallen log. "About that day, about what might have happened if you hadn't come along." Mason nodded. "I know. I hear you sometimes." He had learned over the years when to wake her and when to simply hold her until the dreams passed. "But they're less frequent now," she continued. "And when I wake, the reality is so much better than any dream could be." Mason lifted her hand to his lips. "When I found you, I thought I was saving your life," he said reflectively. "Never occurred to me you'd end up saving mine too." "That's what love does," Sophia said simply. "It saves us over and over again." They stayed on the ridge until the moon rose, silver light bathing the land they both loved. The ranch buildings below, the grazing cattle, the corral of horses, the garden Sophia tended with such care, all of it built from the ashes of separate tragedies into a shared triumph. When they finally returned to their home, Mason paused on the porch, drawing Sophia into his arms for a kiss that held the same tenderness as that first one he'd pressed to her forehead so many years ago. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," he whispered against her lips. Sophia smiled, her blue eyes reflecting the starlight. I've been home since the moment you found me, Mr. Thornton. Everything else was just details. Hand in hand, they entered the house they'd built together, not just the physical structure, but the life it contained. A life neither had expected to find in the unforgiving landscape of the Arizona Territory, but one that had taken root and flourished against all odds. Outside, the desert wind whispered across the land, carrying the story of a man who had once promised safety to a woman lying in the dust, and of the love that had grown from that simple act of kindness, a love as enduring as the mountains that watched over them, and as vast as the star-filled sky above. As the years passed, the Thornton Ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. Mason's expertise with horses brought buyers from across the country, while Sophia's chicken and egg business expanded to include dairy cows and cheese production that supplied not only Silver Creek, but neighboring towns as well. Their children grew strong and capable in the frontier environment. Margaret, their firstborn, developed her father's way with horses and her mother's determined spirit. By 15, she was helping Mason train even the most difficult animals, showing a natural talent that amazed visitors to the ranch. The twins, Samuel and Michael, were as different as brothers could be despite their identical appearance. Sam had a head for figures and business, keeping the ranch books from the age of 12 with remarkable accuracy. Mike preferred the physical aspects of ranching, working alongside the hands and showing particular skill with cattle. When Margaret turned 16, Mason presented her with a special gift, a spirited young mare he'd been training secretly for months. "She's just like you," he told his daughter as the beautiful Palomino pranced around the corral. "Smart, stubborn, and not afraid of anything. She's perfect, Papa," Margaret whispered, already in love with the animal. "What's her name?" "That's for you to decide," Mason said, his arm around Sophia as they watched their daughter approach the horse with confident movements. Margaret considered the question seriously, studying the mare's intelligent eyes and golden coat catching the sunlight. "Promise," she finally declared. "Her name is Promise." Sophia and Mason exchanged glances, both understanding the significance that neither had ever shared with their children. The story of how they met remained private. The children knew only that their father had helped their mother during a difficult time before they married. "It's a good name," Mason approved, his voice slightly husky. As their children grew toward adulthood, Sophia and Mason faced the bittersweet reality of eventual separation. Margaret, at 18, received a marriage proposal from the son of a neighboring rancher, a good young man whom Mason grudgingly admitted was worthy of his daughter. "She's too young," he protested to Sophia the night after the young man had formally asked for Margaret's hand. "She's the same age I was when we married," Sophia reminded him gently. "That was different," Mason insisted. "You were." "I was what?" Sophia prompted when he trailed off. Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair, now more silver than dark. "You were stronger than anyone I'd ever met." "You still are." "And who do you think Margaret takes after?" Sophia asked with raised eyebrows. "She's been learning strength from both of us her entire life." The wedding took place the following spring, with Margaret radiant in Sophia's carefully preserved wedding dress, altered to fit their daughter's taller frame. As Mason walked her down the aisle of Silver Creek's now expanded church, Sophia saw the same mixture of pride and loss on his face that she felt in her own heart. "We're not losing her," she whispered to him when he took his place beside her. "We're gaining family." Mason squeezed her hand in silent agreement, though it took him several months to fully accept his new son-in-law. Even after the young couple established their own smaller ranch on adjoining land Mason gave them as a wedding gift. The twins followed different paths as they approached manhood. Sam, with his head for business, accepted an apprenticeship with a bank in Santa Fe, his departure leaving a quiet space in the bustling household. Mike remained at the ranch, gradually taking on more responsibility as Mason began to feel the effects of years of hard physical work. "My joints aren't what they used to be," he admitted reluctantly to Sophia on his 50th birthday. "Breaking horses is a young man's game." "Then it's fortunate we have a young man who's eager to learn," Sophia replied practically, referring to Mike. "And you have other skills to pass on." "Indeed," Mason found satisfaction in mentoring not only his son but other young men in the area who sought his expertise. His reputation had grown over the years, and ranchers sent their sons to learn from the legendary Mason Thornton, whose methods for gentling horses were respected throughout the territories. Sophia, too, found herself in a mentoring role as Silver Creek continued to grow. Young wives and mothers sought her advice on everything from gardening to childbirth, and she established a small school in town where girls could learn practical frontier skills alongside basic academics. "You've become quite the community leader," Mason teased her after one town meeting, where her suggestion for establishing a proper hospital had been enthusiastically received. "Someone has to civilize this place," she retorted with a smile. "Besides, I learned from the best about building something from nothing." Their partnership remained the foundation of everything they achieved, a bond forged in crisis and strengthened through years of shared joys and sorrows. They weathered droughts that threatened the ranch, illness that kept Sophia bedridden for weeks one winter, and the heartbreak of a stillborn grandchild when Margaret's first pregnancy ended in tragedy. Through it all, they faced life together, drawing strength from each other in a way that became legendary in Silver Creek. Young couples were often advised to be like the Thorntons if they wanted a successful marriage, a suggestion that always made Sophia laugh and Mason blush. "If they only knew how often we disagree," Sophia would say after such comments. "It's not about never disagreeing," Mason would reply. "It's about never forgetting what matters most." 20 years after Mason had found Sophia on that dusty trail, Silver Creek honored them at the town's anniversary celebration. The mayor, who had been just a deputy when Sophia first arrived in the area, presented them with a plaque commemorating their contributions to the community's growth. "The Thornton Ranch has been a cornerstone of our town's prosperity," he announced to the gathered crowd. "And Mason and Sophia Thornton have exemplified the very best of frontier spirit, hard work, generosity, and unwavering courage in the face of adversity." As applause filled the town square, Mason leaned close to whisper in Sophia's ear, "Not bad for a half-dead girl I found in the dust, and a lonely widower, eh?" "Not bad at all," she agreed, her eyes shining with happiness as she looked at their assembled family, Margaret with her husband and their 3 children, Sam, home from Santa Fe with his fiancée, and Mike standing tall beside his own new bride. That night, after the celebration, Mason and Sophia sat on their porch swing watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. The ranch was quieter now, with the children grown and most of the work handled by hired hands under Mike's supervision. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken a different trail that day?" Sophia asked, her head resting comfortably on Mason's shoulder. "Never," he replied without hesitation. "Some things are meant to be, Sophia. I was meant to find you, even though it brought danger to your door. The Banning gang might never have targeted you if not for me." Mason chuckled softly. "After 20 years, you're still worrying about that? The Bannings were destined for a bad end, with or without our involvement. And what came after," he gestured toward their home, the ranch, the life they'd built, was worth any risk. Sophia nodded against his shoulder, content with his answer. At 42, her golden hair now held streaks of silver, and fine lines marked the corners of her eyes. But Mason still looked at her as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked. "When you found me?" "I believe I said a great many things, most of them probably foolish," Mason replied with a smile. "But I remember promising you'd be safe. And kissing my forehead," Sophia added. "That's what I remember most clearly, how gentle you were, even though I was filthy and half dead." Mason turned to look at her, his eyes soft in the fading light. "You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen," he said simply. "Dirty or not." "Liar," Sophia laughed. "I looked terrible, and you know it." "You looked alive," Mason corrected her. And that was all that mattered. He leaned forward to kiss her forehead just as he had that day, his lips lingering against her skin with a tenderness that hadn't diminished with the passing years. "I love you, Sophia Thornton," he murmured. "More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow." "And I love you," she replied, turning her face up to meet his lips with her own. "My cowboy who keeps his promises." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, and in the knowledge that from the most desperate beginnings can come the most beautiful of lives, if only someone is brave enough to make a promise and strong enough to keep it. The years continued to flow, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The territory became a state. The frontier gradually disappeared as civilization pushed westward, and the Thornton Ranch adapted to changing times while maintaining its core values. Margaret and her husband eventually took over her parents' adjoining land, merging the properties into an even larger operation. Sam's banking career prospered in Santa Fe, and he opened a branch in Silver Creek that helped finance the town's continued growth. Mike and his wife raised 4 children on the original homestead, living in a new house built nearby, while Sophia and Mason remained in the expanded cabin that had been their home for so long. As they moved into their 60s, Mason and Sophia gradually stepped back from daily ranch operations, though neither could ever fully retire. Mason continued to consult on horse breeding and training, his expertise valued even as new techniques emerged. Sophia's garden expanded into an experimental farm where she tested crops suitable for the challenging climate, sharing her findings with neighbors and publishing articles in agricultural journals. Their greatest joy came from their grandchildren, 11 in all, who filled the ranch with noise and energy during holidays and summer visits. Mason taught each child to ride, just as he had taught their parents, while Sophia passed on her knowledge of frontier skills and her love of books. "You're spoiling them," Margaret would protest when she found her children returning from their grandparents with new books, handmade toys, or tales of adventures around the ranch. "That's what grandparents are for," Sophia would reply serenely. "Your father and I have earned the right." Indeed, after decades of hard work and sacrifice, they had earned their moments of indulgence. Their partnership remained as strong as ever, though time had softened some edges and deepened others. They argued less frequently but more meaningfully, having learned which battles were worth fighting and which were better surrendered. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration that brought friends and family from across the expanding western states. The original cabin, now serving as the heart of a much larger home, was decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, and tables spread across the yard groaned with food prepared by generations of Thorntons. During the festivities, the oldest grandchild, Margaret's firstborn son, asked the question the younger generation had often wondered about. "Grandpa, how did you and Grandma meet?" No one ever tells the whole story. A hush fell over the gathering as all eyes turned to Mason and Sophia, seated together in matching rocking chairs on the porch. They exchanged a look, a lifetime of understanding passing between them in an instant. "Well," Mason began, his voice still strong despite his 70 years, "I was riding back from delivering horses to Fort Apache when I saw something unusual on the trail ahead." As he recounted the story they had kept largely private for 4 decades, Sophia watched the faces of their children and grandchildren, seeing shock, admiration, and finally understanding dawn in their expressions. "You never told us Grandma was nearly dead when you found her," Mike said accusingly when Mason finished. "Or that the Banning gang was after her specifically," Sam added. Sophia smiled gently at her grown sons. "Some stories are meant to be lived, not told," she explained. "And we didn't want to frighten you when you were young. Besides," Mason added with a wink toward his wife, "the important part isn't how we met, but what we built afterward." The celebration continued into the night, but the story had changed something subtle in the family's understanding of their history. The younger generations looked at Mason and Sophia with new eyes, seeing not just beloved grandparents, but pioneers who had faced death and danger with remarkable courage. Later, when the guests had departed and the family had retired to their various accommodations around the property, Mason and Sophia walked arm in arm to the ridge overlooking the ranch, the same spot where they had often come to mark the anniversary of their meeting. Age had slowed their steps, but not dimmed their appreciation for the view. Lights twinkling from buildings that hadn't existed when they first stood there, fields stretching in orderly patterns where once there had been only wild brush, orchards Mason had planted when the twins were born, now tall and productive. "We did all this," Sophia said wonderingly, gesturing toward their domain. "We did," Mason agreed, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "From nothing but a promise made to a girl lying in the dust." And now look at us old and respectable, Sophia laughed. Who would have thought? Mason turned to face her, the moonlight silvering his white hair and softening the lines time had carved into his beloved face. I would have, he said seriously. I knew from the beginning you were extraordinary, Sophia Hart Thornton. I just didn't know how extraordinary until I had the privilege of spending a lifetime with you. Sophia reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing features as familiar to her as her own. And I knew you were a good man the moment you stopped to help a stranger, she replied. But I couldn't have imagined how good until I saw you as a husband, a father, a grandfather. Everything you've been to so many people. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning and had kept watch over their journey through the decades. Shall we go home? Mason finally asked, noticing Sophia shiver slightly in the night air. We are home, she replied simply, gesturing to the land around them. All of this is home, every rock and tree and blade of grass. Because we're together on it. Mason smiled, understanding perfectly. He bent to kiss her forehead in the gesture that had become their most intimate tradition, a reminder of beginnings and promises kept. As they made their way carefully back down the path, guided by moonlight and memory, both were aware of the precious gift they had been given, not just years together, but a love that had never stopped growing, never stopped challenging them to be better, never stopped comforting them when life was hard. From the most desperate of beginnings had come the richest of lives. From a chance encounter on a dusty trail had grown a legacy that would continue long after they were gone, in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that bore their name, in the community they had helped build, and in the stories that would be told about the legendary Mason and Sophia Thornton for generations to come. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy who stopped to help a girl lying in the dust, who kissed her forehead and promised her safety. A promise that had expanded over the years to include not just physical protection, but emotional sanctuary, unwavering support, and a love that had proven as vast as the western sky and as enduring as the mountains that had witnessed their beginning. As they reached their home, lights glowing welcomingly in the windows, Mason paused on the porch steps. Thank you, he said softly. For what? Sophia asked. For making that promise so easy to keep, he replied. And for giving me so much more than I ever dreamed possible. Sophia smiled up at the man who had been her rescuer, her partner, her lover, her friend, the center of her world for most of her life. Thank you for stopping on that trail, she said simply. For seeing something worth saving in a half-dead stranger. Best decision I ever made, Mason assured her, opening the door to the home they had built together, a home that had grown from a simple cabin to a place filled with love, laughter, memories, and the promise of more to come. Hand in hand, they crossed the threshold, two people who had faced the harsh realities of frontier life and emerged not just survivors, but victors, their love a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and unwavering commitment through all of life's seasons. The legacy of Mason and Sophia Thornton continued to flourish long after they were gone. Their ranch became one of the most respected in the state, their methods for sustainable land management studied by agricultural colleges, their breeding lines of horses sought after across the country. But their greatest achievement remained the family they had created, generations of Thorntons who carried forward not just their name but their values. Courage in adversity, kindness toward strangers, unwavering commitment to those they loved, and the understanding that true wealth comes not from possessions but from connections. And at family gatherings, long after Mason and Sophia had passed into memory, someone would inevitably tell the story that had become family legend of a cowboy who found a girl lying in the dust, who lifted her up, kissed her forehead, and promised her safety. A promise that had built not just a marriage or a family, but a dynasty born of love in the wild frontier.